There we go.
Or were we muted?
We were, sorry, Alex. We were just going over minutes.
We're going over minutes and we asked for any public comment. I don't know if there's anyone online who couldn't hear us. Is it just Alex?
I think so, yep.
Okay. If you have any public comment, let us know. All right, does anybody have any other items for the minutes, or should we, entertain a motion here to approve them as amended and displayed? Anybody?
I make a motion to approve as amended.
All right.
I second.
Thanks, guys. Vote. Anybody against? Anybody for? All right. There we go. All right, next item is pretty wide open here, which is applicant presenting the revised plan and vision for the project. I assume everybody got to review the documents ahead of time. It's just this one page. Is that correct, Ken? This is all that was attached. It's the one page.
Yes,
Okay. You want to take us through?
sure. Do you want to?
I'll screen share, yep, and then you
Great,
can.
thank you. I have one other document. I don't know if you want me to send it to you, Emily. It's just displaying some of the information that was on the plan in a slightly different manner.
Mhm.
Do you want me to email that to you, or do you want me to share my screen? What would you like me to do?
Whichever you prefer. I can, if you want to screen share that one. You'd have to be in the Zoom meeting to screen share.
Okay,
So either way.
I'm gonna email it to you. Because if I do that, I could do it a lot faster than I could to join the Zoom meeting and. Okay,
Ken, while you're bringing that up and she's getting your email, one item that was on the minutes and we discussed a lot last time was just about taking minutes in the future. How are you guys going to handle that going forward?
so if the committee is satisfied with the level of detail that I'm able to etch out, I'm willing to do it. Not my first choice, but
I thought we
I thought we, yeah,
kind of thought that we weren't going to do that.
well, I'm not sure that I have any good options for procuring a service to do that. Do you guys have any leads on anybody that does that?
No, I mean, usually like at the other meetings, staff does it. I think for this process, it's probably fine if Ken does it. I mean, the meetings are recorded, so if there's any concern, but then you can go back to the recording. Minutes are mainly just to say what generally was talked about, were any motions or decisions made, who was there. So I think it's fine if Ken does it. If someone from the committee wants to do it, that could work as well. I'd rather not do it. I've got a lot of other board minutes to do.
The other point about if we were to hire someone to do the minutes, we still could potentially have a conflict of interest because we're employing Ken. If we employ the minute taker, they're not necessarily considered to be totally neutral and unbiased, so.
I personally, am comfortable with the types of minutes that Ken provided, given that all of these meetings are now recorded, it's streamed on Zoom for anyone to see. So I would be comfortable continuing this way. I know others on the committee were not. Does anybody?
Well, we're going to vote to approve them. So if we took issue with something, we could address it.
Absolutely. And normally the process for the planning commission is instead of a PDF link, we provide a tracked Word link so that anyone can log in and just make track changes from the committee. So you can come prepared for the meeting with your notes displayable on the screen. Everybody can see who made which edits and such. If we could continue that process, and it'd be a lot easier. Don't know, is it Ken who posts them directly, or does he share them with you? to
Yeah,
post them?
for the first one, we just wanted to see what level of detail you guys wanted to do. If you wanted to do it the cloud share way, we could set that up for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think
It's just posted as a Microsoft Word, Word document.
Mhm.
yeah, the editable ones are useful because if anyone does have any issues, so they can just go in, make the changes they want to see, we can see them tracked and we can vote on them.
I'm fine with that.
You're fine?
Yeah.
Anybody else, Ruben? I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, so why don't we just continue? I don't think we need a motion on this or anything. So the floor is yours after that, Ken.
Okay, so this is a revised plan that we generated at the request of the committee at the last meeting. And we do have, there's the original plan that we put out in front of the planning commission. There was a revised plan that we put out in the before the planning commission. Those are all available and we can show them if that's of interest to you. But this plan is different because this plan is our first pass at trying to modify the plan against the various items that were in the charge coming from the planning commission. So that whatever 10, 12 list of items that were there that the planning commission said that they wanted us to see if we could try to address. So this plan is turned sideways. You can imagine north is pointing over to the right-hand side of the document. And so there along the right-hand side of the site is Mountain View Road, and Old Stage Road would be to the bottom of the picture, just in terms of orienting. Where we're literally sitting right now, we would be off to the left, off screen, over to the left. So that's where the property is situated physically. So there in the green, you have on the right-hand side, that's the proposed open space that we're proposing to basically give to the town to protect the view shed. There's a sort of a generalized location of where a multi-use path would go, the exact alignment to be determined. There is a proposed road access onto Mountain View Road. That would, Emily's highlighting there with the.
That's me.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
you.
that's not me.
Okay.
I was like, who has the magic pen? It's Ryan, okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, yeah.
No, you're doing good. So there's a proposed road connection, and off of that, the first thing you see up there is a proposed little parking area. We just sort of, throw that out as a, as a talking point. We can talk more about it later. And eventually that road would connect to the roadway that would access to where the proposed units would go.
Right, we're showing the connection right here, but the right of way is along that entire northern line.
Right.
So theoretically, with public works support of where that site distance makes sense, it could be further up, but we're showing it right here.
So, one of the things is you want to have that stub street connection, but exactly where it would go when you take into consideration what's on the other property, that might need to be moved in some fashion. So can we zoom out so we can see more of the, so there's a development node on the northern part of the property, which you can see there. And what has been added in various places that you can see, there's at least one that's on the screen now, a possible place for a community garden. That dark green area, I would point out, that's a class 2 wetland with the wetland buffer all indicating. So all the development area would be, outside of that area. You can see, I guess, sort of to the left, just above the wetland, right, there's a sort of a proposed community building where there could be some type of small scale park, whatever, that would be accessed, by the community. And then along there, there is think of as a multi-use path. And exactly what that build standard of that might be, we're sort of understanding it as something that could be utilized as both a multi-use path and also a potential emergency access for an emergency vehicle. If for some reason you couldn't access that other development node, which you're gonna have to zoom out or shift over to be able to see fully. And then that brighter green area on the top of the page, that's also part of the other wetland area that would potentially be donated to the town. Within that, there's a line showing you the edge of the class 2 wetland along with the 50-foot wetland buffer that's also prescribed by Vermont state law. I would point out, it's been mentioned several times, but I know, Gary, you had asked about the wetland delineation. So all of our calculations on wetlands just assume that whole thing is a class 2 wetland. And if you really parsed it out and you really wanted to look for upland areas, you would probably find some in there. They're probably not usable. They're probably not accessible. And we're just saying, we're conceding the point and just assuming it's all class 2 wetland. And we intend to stay out of there. And that number goes into our calculations of what's considered to be a class 2 wetland. So in terms of how, we calculate density of all that sort of stuff, that's part of it. And then, so there's a second development node on the sort of the lower left. How many units are in that particular pod, Brian?
I believe it's 66, 68, somewhere along there.
Right. So that's an issue that's part of the request for the specific plan, because there's a maximum of 40 dwelling units that could be accessed from a single point of access to a public road. That's the default standard. There is some language in the bylaw that says, unless it's waived. It's been suggested that this could be an item for discussion potentially. The specific plan is a bylaw change. So things could be changed. All sorts of things could be changed, included, yes.
Ken, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
So I was under the impression that you couldn't change a public works standard from a unified bylaw. And I'm probably phrasing that wrong.
Well, the 2 points of access is in the bylaw, not in the public works standards.
Okay.
So it's in
Yeah.
the bylaw as part of this process. Technically, anything that's in the bylaw is, is on the table. I mean,
Right.
we're trying to keep it to a minimum, and we're trying to.
So you don't have to get public works buy-in for this. It's if
Well, as a practical matter,
you probably do, right?
well, we need to get Bruce to understand, we need to get the fire department to say,
Okay, yeah.
this is gonna work for them.
Right.
So that's an important part. And so that's something that we'll need to do, is have a discussion with them. When we've had some of the preliminary discussions we had with staff was the prospect that, well, maybe it could be developed where, as I'm sure you know, sometimes you have a fire department wants to get access to all sides, for example, of a big building. And it might still be landscaped,
Yeah.
but underneath it, it's supported in a way that a truck can drive over it and.
Been there.
Right. So we're sort of hoping that would be something that could be entertained in lieu of having to build it out to a whole road standard, which has an environmental impact. It also has a cost impact on the project. It would, to put in that, well, it's not up there. I can see it on my screen, but to put in that long road to meet that requirement, that would change things significantly for the project. So, that's there. We're throwing it out. We do see it as helping to meet some of what is desired in terms of pedestrian multi-use access. It's a way of cutting the corner, if you will, to go from Old Stage Road all the way up to Mountain View Road without literally making the 90-degree turn at the intersection of those two roads. But so that's what that is. And you can see we've got a proposed recreation area that's there just to the sort of the east of there.
Can I ask
then,
a follow-up
yep,
question?
yep.
So do we have any history of these counting as a secondary access in the town now, or do they have to reach a certain standard, I assume?
Yes,
There used to be a legacy standard where you could have an unimproved type of emergency connector. There's one sort of between Katy Lane and Meadow Run. So it's-
Williston Woods has
Williston
one.
Woods has one, but because of the challenge of that standard, you know, an unpaved surface for fire and police access is
Not
very
desirable,
feasible.
for sure.
Pinecrest has one.
And that 40 units, like, that number, I think, just kind of came out of the sky. Like, there's
Right.
really no grounding in the bylaw or the town plan why 40 was picked. I think the intent was, you know, we definitely don't want, you know, maybe 100 or 200 units on the dead end. But maybe going above 40 to the 60, 70 number of units is okay. The way the charge reads, the applicant, staff, and committee will seek comment from police and fire, including data comparing Williston's call volume to other geographic locations and uses. So I think the intent in limiting that is the ability to provide emergency services. How many people would be impacted if the road had to get closed for a temporary period? In general, police and fire see more call volume from larger commercial uses, senior living, rather than, you know, residential.
It's interesting, I always thought that figure was hard and fast, because that's the way it's always been presented. But if it's not hard and fast,
It's nice to
then
know.
it's something that ought to go in front of it. I think if it's not hard and fast here, and we're talking about it, then maybe at some point it ought to go in front of the planning commission to be
I believe the way,
revised.
I believe the way the bylaw is written is it's hard and fast without exception, correct? Like we picked 40 just as a reasonably low threshold, you should say today, it's before I was on the committee. But above 40, I believe you still have to get effectively sign off from the DRB. I think it is, it allows for exceptions.
So
those
that's
exceptions.
interesting, because I've been sitting on the DRB for 15 years.
No, I
and
don't think there's any exceptions.
There's no
exception?
exception.
Oh, okay, I'm misunderstanding.
Right.
All right,
Since it's
I'll
in the
make,
bylaw.
That's a hard and fast
The
number.
exception
I'll make a
is
note
for,
of that for the next.
It's just, it's just, again, if it's not hard and fast to the town, we ought to.
I think there is some language that says if you, and if somehow if you can demonstrate that, I don't know, I thought there
there's
was.
something for like industrial.
I thought there was a-
No more than 40 dwelling units may be served by a single point of access. Where an existing dead end road already serves 40 dwellings, further development will be limited to one for each existing parcel.
You can remember it all.
And there's one that's like, emergency access road does not meet the standards for a public or private road. The DRB may permit an exception of emergency access for non-residential development, like an industrial plant,
Okay,
where control of public access is operationally necessary.
Right.
DRB has an exception, but it has been used in a very long
it's pretty,
time.
it's pretty limited. What I would say about the 40 number, you know, the 40 number is a number, you know, that somebody somewhere in the United States probably did some research somewhere. But I think it's one of those things where lots of people use it. I can tell you, you know, I was working in Shelburne recently. They have the same thing, you know, it's, you know,
South Burlington's 50, you know, arbitrary, you know, but I think Essex is 50 as well. So it's in that range, but 40 would be on the lower side of what we typically see.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think some of it kind of forgets the nuance of, in general, you want to be pushing projects to connectivity, multiple points of access connecting
Yeah.
over to an abutting property, not have, you know, cul-de-sacs everywhere. But in a challenging site like this, where there's a lot of wetland, it's not feasible to get that second point of access.
Right, so as far as, you know, the directive to the advisory committee, the first bullet there, you know, items we would take exception to in the bylaw, this would be on our list, as currently shown. And I just note that in what we talked to the fire department with is, you know, the point of access where you get to the loop is very short. So the only part that, you know, you worry about being blocked as far as getting to the rest of the development is very short. The cul-de-sac, even though this is less than the 40 units that's required by the bylaw, you know, obviously there's a much higher chance of units being blocked off in that loop. And that's something we talked to the fire department about. How comfortable they are with that, given that access road with a community center on it that, you know, is going to be maintained by the HOA. They're going to want seasonal access to it. Gives more of a reason to keep that road open and maintained as emergency access.
Yeah, that's a good point. With the community center building, you suddenly have a
Right,
need
it's paved,
So
so it's not some of the dirt gravel roads that we've seen in the past. So.
Right, generally speaking, the big concern in my experience with these and secondary, non-road secondary accesses is you want it to be maintained, and you want it to be maintained in a way that leaves it open for a vehicle to go through there. And, you know, so, you know, Brian's point of having this sort of recreation area there, that would help to ensure that it would be maintained in an operational fashion, you know, going forward in time. There was an issue that came up in Pine Crest Village over that issue about maintenance, whatever, this is a bunch of years ago. But that's really is one of the big concerns when you have a non-road point of access, is that it's going to be maintained over, you know, over time.
yeah, I imagine Bruce, the first thing he's gonna say is it's gotta be wide enough for a truck to plow it,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
I think,
he's gonna not want to have to plow any of this, is what he's gonna say. He's gonna want to not have to plow any of this. He's gonna want all these roads to
Because
be
they don't go
private.
anywhere, so it'll be private.
and I don't want to speak for Bruce, but generally speaking, in developments we've worked on recently, he's not taking over roads that don't fully loop. I
Yeah.
would say fully, you know, end on an existing town road, like Northridge, for example, that's gonna remain private until that development eventually goes up and hits Mountain View Road. So I wouldn't expect him to support the town taking over this road, but, you know, again, I don't want to speak for Bruce.
So with it says community gardens, community space, does that mean, so if those are private roads and a private path, does community mean like community for the people that live in the, you know, units, or
Yes.
community okay.
Yes. If you look in the bylaw, there's a descriptor for the various types of parks in the town, and one is, they call it a neighborhood park, I think.
Yeah, the growth management criteria.
And so you have, you know, a development like this, which would have a smallish park, recreation area, whatever. That really, it's just designed to be available for the people that live there. Not necessarily, it's not like, you know, the park that exists over there behind the school or near Allen Brook or any of those things.
So like Southfield or the Indian Run or Brennan Woods has that little.
That's right.
Yeah, okay,
That's right.
got it.
So,
But can you maybe speak more to the 12 parking area at the border of Mountain View?
so I think, Scott, you were the one that sort of asked about that. So we wanted to, you know, throw that in there as just sort of showing something as an example of a potential parking area. You know, my view on this has been to not get too involved with designing the park. Understanding that, you know, there's a process. So assuming that the specific plan goes through and this piece of land gets donated to the town, how is the town going to want to use it? My guess is there's going to be a lot more people than the people in this room who are going to want to participate in the planning for that. And there could be, you know, all sorts of visions for it. Leave it as it is. Maybe there's just this path. Maybe there's picnic tables. There could be all, you know, manner of things. So we've sort of thrown that in, that if you wanted to have a parking area, you could have a parking area there. It could be accessed off of that proposed road access coming off of Mountain View Road.
And if this was something that the committee was in favor of, this aside from the community center, it'd be on town land, so it would be provided for the town, the rec path, obviously. We would build regardless as we're showing it. But that would obviously be a town amenity as well.
And it could help with those growth management points, because the planning commission wants us to try to achieve a higher score. There's the sustainable transportation criteria, EV charge, car pool spaces.
Yep.
So that this could serve that dual purpose.
Speaking of the connection to Mountain View Road, I think last time we talked about it being a quite steep of a drop off from Mountain View Road here. And then, Emily, can you just zoom out a little bit?
Mhm.
In the previous versions of the plan, and I know you were doing this to try to accommodate our questions about access from Mountain View Road, as well as our questions about things like housing type and density.
Yep.
But previously coming off of, I'm sorry, my brain is Old Stage.
Yep.
You had the road extending through what is now labeled as a Class 2 wetland buffer.
Yep, that was always labeled, I think, what happened was originally we had this class 2 wetland that was a no-brainer. Right, this pocket here, our wetland consultant originally classified that as class 3, non-jurisdictional. All right, when we went out to this, so the way wetland delineations work, right, you go out, we hire somebody to go out and delineate, but just because the person we hire says this is where the wetland is and this is the classification, doesn't mean that's what it is. There's another layer of the process where we have to meet the state wetlands program out and we show them the delineation and they either agree or from time to time they make changes. So in this instance, and I think I'm referring to one of the older plans, not this
Not
one,
this one.
but a previous rendition of this. So this has it as a class 2 buffer around there, but the one before this, when our wetland consultant marked off the class 2, he had this as a class 3. The state didn't agree with that determination, so we have it now shown as a class 2. And we were trying to keep the cul-de-sac generally the same. So we were showing the crossing at a point where the 2 wetlands don't connect. So we were trying to cross at the narrowest point possible. So in order to save a crossing and a lot of public infrastructure that essentially wouldn't be used, with the planning commission looking for that connection on Mountain View to serve neighboring properties, we felt there was a great opportunity to keep the road from that wetland crossing. It's a more efficient layout. The road now comes down off Mountain View, swings around here, and then kind of takes a little nosedive towards the end here, making the units lower, preserving more of the view.
Brian,
We saw it as.
Are you allowed to cross class 2 wetlands to?
You are in certain circumstances.
Perpendicular, minimize impact, that kind of.
Correct. The first thing the state wetlands program asked us to do is to find an alternative. Now, if we were proposing more than 40 units off a single access and we were held by the restrictions of the bylaw, traditionally, the wetlands programs said, okay, that's a reasonable request in order to cross a wetland. So if we were proposing 60 units on a road that had to be looped in order to meet the 40 units off of one access requirement, I believe that we would be able to get a wetland crossing for this. But
There's a constant drumbeat of, call it complaints, comments about access onto Mountain View.
Yep.
And it certainly seems like if the access could be kept on Old Stage, you would make a lot of people in the area happier.
yeah,
We'll probably make it all quite a bit safer, so slower, speed limit, et cetera.
Well, that said.
I know the planning
The
commission.
charge from the planning commission was for us to
Explore.
explore this,
Explore.
so.
Not everyone on. the
Here we are
planning commission-
exploring.
Not everyone on the planning commission agreed on that, but.
On the other hand, I know in our commission, the Conservation Commission, if you came in with crossing a wetland, we would really get you guys to think about not doing that if at all possible. So even if, if you did want to stay access from Old Stage, I don't know, maybe you can sneak something around the end there. I don't know, but
right, and that eats into the
Yeah.
parcel that's dedicated to the
Yeah.
town.
well, you could make it a little bigger this way.
Yeah.
If you want to keep to that number.
I bring that up simply because it's something we hear all the time
Yeah.
about Mountain View.
Can we move on?
Sure.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah,
What is that area? Can you tell us more about that area right there at the bottom of Old Stage Road, this 9 units?
yeah, so we haven't gotten to that yet.
Oh, got it.
That's where I was gonna go.
So, slowly moving around.
Yeah.
So,
And just the other point is a terminology thing, because it seems that, the public can see this, and if they see anything that has the word community, that has a different perception in terms of, oh, community garden. Okay, is this like Granite Woods community garden or so? I just want to make sure that the public is aware that this community, designated community pieces, in fact, belong to the residents. only.
sure.
Like, clarify like HOA next to it or something.
Yeah, we can put whatever label it seems best suited. I mean, what I would say is it's, that term of community garden is one that gets used a lot. Like I know the Conservation Commission often mentions that. What about community garden? You see it, it's sort of standard language that you would see on plans. And it gets discussed in that way at the DRB. So we're just trying to use the conventional, language that's used on most of these types of plans. It could be labeled as something else too, as long as everybody understood, what that was.
Yeah, maybe neighborhood garden would be fine.
Sure, yeah.
That was my question too. So it just, if it does go public, I think that a definition for that would just help with clarity.
I guess as far as access out to Mountain View is, before we finish that, so there's 9 units down here. There's 38 off that cul-de-sac, and then the remainder is off that loop road. So it's 110 units in total, so the vast majority are coming off Old Stage. Just so we haven't gotten into how we've gotten the unit mixes kind of gotten there, but the vast majority, so this is 38 units off the cul-de-sac here.
Are these all 3 or 4 bedrooms, or have we talked about this?
We haven't done bedroom counts yet. Each of the multi-units are 28-foot wide. So each one is 28 feet in a triplex. Duplex is 28 and 28, 56. And these are the single family carriage homes. We're also showing single family lots.
These would probably be most likely 2s and 3s, right? The smaller units would be 2 bedrooms and.
Might be 2s and 3s, yeah, I would expect so. The single families, you might see some 4s here, but primarily 2s and 3s. So these are single family lots, and we'll get into the unit types a little bit more when we talk about the growth management, but it's not totally apparent the densities of the two just by looking at it from that high level. So I just wanted to note that the majority of the units are coming off Old Stage.
And then, so there's the third development pod, which Ruben asked about earlier. That's just a small development pod that would be accessed off of Old Stage Road. So those are, I don't know, those are the main features that are incorporated in the plan. Now, Brian and I were talking about this earlier today, and so these are, what you're seeing there is really as seen from a bird, as it were, sort of the footprint of what would be the foundation. And so what we haven't lost sight of is the, one of the items of the charge was to de-emphasize the garages from the, as the.
Can you zoom in on this little area here? Yeah, so as Ken was saying, one of the charges was to de-emphasize the garages. So what we are showing here is, and it's not apparent from the shading, but these are front porches here that are on each one of the units. And the garage is set back at least 4 feet. So that's something we're comfortable with as a condition of approval or part of the recommendation from this committee. We are receptive of setting the garages back. We're proposing 4 feet. And all of the multifamily units show it, the single family lots. Obviously, we don't know what the footprints are exactly until they come in, but we would be okay with setting the porches back 4 feet from the garages and those as well.
Are you going to build the houses on the single family lots? Or you're gonna let a developer come in and sell the lot and let a developer build what they want to build?
Primarily, I think we would build the lots.
So will you have a, you know, a palette of elevations for somebody to pick from 1, 2, 3, 4, and then, you know, and kind of like a production home builder?
I don't know if it'd necessarily be elevations. It may just be maybe a design narrative that comes along with when you go for building permit application. One of the checklist items is, you know, is the front porch setback from the garage. At least 4 feet.
Like our HOA architectural standards.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know if it needs to rise to the area of a covenant. That could be a condition of approval, say, something they look for before issuing a building permit. So, we'll zoom out a little bit to the whole. So one of the things that we are showing is a rec path starting on Old Stage Road and going through the loop development on the south, continuing through the community center and making that connection at the Mountain View Road. On the other side of the loop, we're showing a concrete sidewalk. We're showing a concrete sidewalk on the high side of the road for the teardrop cul-de-sac and also to the parking area. One of the items in the bylaw is providing either a rec path or a sidewalk on both sides of the street on a public way that is subject to some interpretation by the DRB that they've used or they've exercised over the last few years. Usually it's where there's not a house or something like that, but we are proposing the pedestrian facilities on one side of the street. So that's something we want to talk to the committee about whether or not.
The town standard is,
Generally speaking, in most circumstances, it's on both sides of the street. Double the plowing. You know, I've walked a lot around Williston this time of year. Most people are walking in the road. It's an awful lot of infrastructure that will need to be maintained by somebody at some point in time.
So, yeah, most people are walking on the road, but we hear few
Yeah.
complaints more than having to walk on the road in the planning commission, right?
Yep.
We hear it constantly.
Yep.
From people that sidewalks weren't built when they should have been.
Yep. Yep, and obviously there's a few thousand feet of multi-use paths extra to connect the two developments and also along Mountain View Road for consideration. But that is something that would be on our list as far as modification from the bylaw.
Okay.
And obviously up for discussion with you folks, but right now we're showing it on one side of the street.
Yeah, the interpretation part comes from sidewalks that are designed and built to comply with Williston's public works specs must be provided on both sides of all proposed roads, except where the town plan calls for a rec path along the proposed road, which must be provided instead. And then where the DRB finds type or density of development does not necessitate a sidewalk or rec path, or at least a sidewalk or rec path on both sides. The DRB considers guiding principles such as low intensity commercial industrial and development. DRB may modify or eliminate for sidewalk where safe, adequate bicycle and pedestrian circulation is provided by an off-street system. And then the ARZD, which is a different zone and district. So this one.
For everybody who's not on the PC and the DRB, rec paths are generally wider than sidewalks. There's more room total.
Yeah, 10 feet.
Yeah.
The Williston standard is a 9-foot green belt with a 5-foot sidewalk. So with a 10-foot rec path, in maintaining area from the walking surface to the right of way for curb stops and those sorts of things, it reduces the green belt a little bit, but generally speaking, it works okay with a 5-foot green belt too.
Mhm.
So,
So, and what you're proposing is one side, and you're proposing rebuild rec path standards on the one side.
the rec path, if you go back, Emily.
Rec path is along that first on the left. And then-
Correct, it could go either way, but we're showing it along the more southern route to
Yeah.
get to the cross-country rec path.
And then a
And then-
standard sidewalk for the remainder across the northern
Correct.
half.
Concrete sidewalk standard on the northern side, and then also concrete sidewalk on the opposed side.
Let me ask a philosophical question. My interpretation of a specific plan is, this is my interpretation, okay? My interpretation of a specific plan is you come before the town and say, we want to build this faster. We basically want to get around growth management. We want to build because we're in the RDD.
In this case, growth management is a piece of it,
It's
but
a only piece of it. I mean, to me, it's the whole thing. Right? It allows you to accelerate the development.
Right.
And it may, I mean, I get it. It makes perfect sense. It's cost effective to build it faster.
Well, so I guess the way I would phrase it is the specific plan provision of the bylaw says that the town has to make a determination that there's a substantial public benefit as defined within there's certain things that are listed as potential criteria. So the onus is on us as the applicant to demonstrate that the project could meet that substantial public benefit in order for us to be at the table to even ask for anything. And then, once we're here, we could theoretically be asking for almost anything to change what's in the bylaw. Now, we're not asking for just anything. I think our requests are focused, but as you pointed out, that clearly the growth management part is a big part of it.
And in my opinion, it's.
For us, for the applicant side, yes.
Well, I think it's for everybody, you know, what you're asking for is to accelerate the build process. To me, and the point I'm trying to make is to me, it feels a little disingenuous to not only ask to accelerate the build process. I get it. I understand why that makes sense in this area. But to ask for a sidewalk on only one side when the town standard is 2, that's not right. And I will be very vocal about that.
Okay.
Okay, and not only in this case, but, you know, anything that you're trying to get away from a town standard where under any other circumstances, you would have to spend that money. To ask not to spend it doesn't, to me, makes no sense. So I'm glad I put that out there.
Yeah. And part of the specific plan is, you know, we're asking.
Throw it on there and see what sticks. I get it.
I understand, yeah, and there's acreage being set aside in order to sit here.
Well, that's the
with you
gift.
folks today. And
That's the
these
gift
are
on
the
your
sorts of
part.
things we're gonna talk about it up until June.
I think Scott's comments are consistent with what the PC was saying. It's an
Yeah.
entire charge memo, which is try to score well on everything else,
Yeah.
but growth management, because growth management is so important to the residents of this town that it into itself is a very large ask, right, to circumvent that process.
And this part of the bylaw that the DRB administers, it's one of those more discretionary areas. Most recent developments that I'm thinking went through the DRB, they didn't have an off-street system of paths to modify that wouldn't rise to the occasion where the DRB would consider modifying or eliminating the requirement for the sidewalk. But the DRB's precedent has been to require sidewalks on both sides of the street for most, if not all projects. Me showed recently went through and it only has sidewalk on one side in a couple of spots to balance out wetland buffer encroachments. So balancing the pedestrian connectivity with that wetland buffer, so it does zigzag across, but the whole DRB's approval through that process was we want them on both sides and then walked it back in order to balance pedestrian with wetland encroachment.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So the other thing that I had emailed Emily, so was just to take the information that Brian had actually written out in the lower left-hand corner of the plan and just displayed it in a little table. And this is kind of the way I like to see this stuff, so I assume everybody else likes it that way too. But also to get at your question about constraints analysis, Scott, from the last time.
Yeah.
So we started off with 97 acres as the base lot area. And then you have wetland area required buffers 54, and you subtract that. This is the process that's prescribed in the bylaw, and you have your remaining developable land area, 43 acres. RZD has a maximum residential zoning district, maximum density of 3 units per acre. That would give you a theoretical maximum dwelling unit yield of 129 dwelling units.
And the bonus density up to 5 per acre would be 215
Right.
if they were to pursue the density bonus.
Right.
Yeah,
Would be a very different looking plan if we were gonna try to get that many dwelling units. What we're proposing is now at 110. What you see here tonight is 110. And so it's a little bit more than what we had originally put forth. And part of that is to try to get at the affordable housing component. So one of the items in the charge was to see if we could do, was it 10%, Emily, 10% of the units as affordable? I think that's what it was.
for the 4-point category.
Yeah, I think that's what it
I
was.
think so.
So,
I should know this. We have growth management coming up in a couple of weeks, so
I think it's 10,
I think so. Yeah, 10%.
10 on 100.
right, so that's where we got to 110. And
So you're proposing that 11 of the units in this development will be perpetually affordable? That's the one here.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and we did put this development together with growth management in mind, looking at that 50-point score. Even though we're not going through the growth management process, the planning commission still asked us to score fairly high for the amount of units that we're proposing.
Mhm.
So I went through all the categories. We've looked at energy, looking at the charge, the categories are, does everyone here know the growth management system generally?
Reasonably well.
Okay, all right, so I won't get into it, but the energy efficiency standard, we
Don't be bashful if you don't understand it.
let's scare everybody.
yeah. So the energy efficiency standard, we weren't going to propose any units to meet the efficiency Vermont standard that's in the growth management regulations.
Can I make a note there just for your benefit? that the
Yes,
Planning Commission tends to put a heavy emphasis on meeting the town energy plan goals, and this is one of them. So if you're going to get this in front of the Planning Commission, I would highly recommend you think carefully about that decision.
I think I think it's the right thing to do.
The experience administering this standard, so for several years, it was just Energy Star level. So pretty much every project was getting 10 out of 10 points. In 2017 or 2018, it changed to the high performance level. So far, only one project has committed to this. And it's a 2-lot split in the ag rural for a custom built home. My understanding from discussions with the development community with Efficiency Vermont is that this can be a little bit more challenging at the production build level. And I think some of the tiers going from nothing to 50% is a very like what's the word I'm looking for? Like the thresholds, the buffering, there's not a lot of nuance there. It's very big discrete chunks. I think, when we talked through this when I looked at the site plan with the agenda on Tuesday, it's probably going to meet the planning commission's goal of 50 points overall and might even get closer to 60.
Sure. It's the first category, but there's obviously many other places to score points, and the efficiency Vermont high performance level that's mentioned in the growth management starts at 50% and it's only worth 4 points. Going up to 100% at 10 points before you get into renewable resources.
Well, I understand completely that it might not be the most efficient way to score 50 points. I'm
Yeah.
just giving you guys sort of fair political warning of what I've seen. You guys have probably not attended as many planning commission meetings as I have, and meeting
Understood.
energy standards is a hot button issue. So I'm just flagging it.
Well, I appreciate the candor, and the one comment that I would make is, as a way of restating what Emily said, which is that it's a goal that nobody has ever met. And you have somebody in a plan for a custom-built home that has yet to be built. But they made a commitment in growth management, and sometimes people get allocation and they let it expire and they don't act on it. I mean, that's happened. Jaguar Lane is a good example of plans that change over time. So I would just simply say, I understand the importance of it as stated, but it's a standard that it's not like there are any examples of anybody else that's ever met it. And perhaps it falls under the category of unobtainium. You know, it's something that you throw out that you might like, but you know, is there any way to really get to it and to do it in a way that's feasible? So,
I'll make,
but I appreciate the warning.
yeah,
absolutely.
I'll make a note to bring that back to the PC too.
Right.
Just to
And
make sure.
it is mentioned in the chart, and they do give us, and it's not that we're not doing energy efficient homes. They are required by, state of Vermont Act 250, which this would be, requires residential stretch code to be met, which isn't a joke. I mean, it's a serious building code. So it's not that we're not meeting energy efficiency standards of the state. It just, we're not meeting the standard to score points in growth management in Williston.
Understood.
And I think the charge too with the planning commission, I'm remembering again now, applicants should consider providing a higher standard of energy efficiency than stretch code, as well as solar ready design for homes. So maybe meeting that efficiency Vermont high performance level, or having 50% of the units do that isn't feasible.
Sure.
But is there something above the state requirement for stretch code? Could the homes have, solar designs in their package, or?
Throw some solar
Yeah.
canopies over those,
Yeah.
4-foot setbacks on the garages.
Yeah. We can definitely.
Things
Yeah.
like that.
So thinking like outside of the box of that 50, 100, and then,
Yeah.
4 days battery, something that could work for this project.
So if we go to the next category, affordable housing units, we are proposing, as we've already talked about, 10% at 100 AMI, which scores us 4 points.
Can I just clarify, is that effectively the triplexes here off of Old Stage Road? Are you pushing all or almost all of that affordable housing into one separate development?
No, there's 9 units there. We have to do 11. It wasn't that wasn't our intention.
Does that just get deed restricted?
The affordability standard, yeah.
Mhm.
The town has a process that
It just follows the house, or it's in the deed?
Yep, it would be in the deed. So if it was a for sale unit, that affordability calculation would be done as part of the sale.
So there's 3 levels: 80 AMI, 100 AMI, and 120 somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
It's 100, yeah.
And that's one of those prescriptive categories. You do this, you get this many points.
So AMI, for those that are uninitiated, is the area median income, which I think I heard recently is it over $100,000
I
now?
want to say it's like 109.
Okay,
For a couple,
for a couple
200,
at $109,000.
something like that,
Mhm.
68 or 69 or something for a single.
And, okay, so the next one is housing choice. So this made probably the biggest change to the development. We came in, our first plan was primarily duplexes. And I think there was one single family home where we found a little extra space. So is the most, majority duplexes. So we've looked at changing that mix, as I touched on before, but now we have 4 housing types. So the growth management looks at how the lots or how structures, the property zoned around them. They give points for single family lots, which are considered different than the carriage homes. All right, so that would count as two different housing types, both single family, but one being single family lot ownership, obviously around your yard and what have you, and the other being a condominium, single family home. Those are viewed as two different types of housing. All right, so those are two. Triplexes now make up approximately 50% of the units, or 45 units are triplexes. There's 15. Part of the bylaw is intermixing them throughout the development. So they're a little more concentrated to Old Stage Road, but they are off of Old Stage Road as well. You see some up on this end of the cul-de-sac road too. And then the duplexes, there's 25, accounting for 48 units. Those are primarily along the cul-de-sac and the loop road on the east side. So with those four unit types, we thought we'd score somewhere in the 7 to 8 points for that category.
So when I think,
Out of 10.
when I think about this category though, and basing on the housing needs report, what was the report that we saw this week?
The housing needs assessment.
Housing needs assessment. If we're a town with roughly 60% of our population, 60% of our homes currently are 3 or 4 bedroom houses, but 60% of our population are 1 or 2 people households. So when I read this housing choice, I would like it to address that mismatch.
A lot of your housing sizes in here are on the smaller side, right? You're targeting 2-bedroom, I think, for a lot of these units, is that correct?
2 to 3, somewhere in that range.
And what 11.7.3 says, this criterion encourages each subdivision to include housing options for a broad spectrum of incomes and types, both owners and renters. The goal is not merely to promote affordability, but to ensure that limiting housing choices do not result in a community with limited cultural and social diversity. And it is scored 1 to 20 points. A mix of dwelling types and sizes that will result in a mix of different housing costs and tenures. So because they're not proposing any rental units, it probably wouldn't get that full 20 out of 20 points. I think their assessment of 7 to 10 is probably what the,
I was on the category next. I had like 14 to 16 looking at past projects for
oh, okay.
4 different types.
Right, and so you'd see, there's the single family dwellings.
Mhm.
Those will be built with a housing product that will be different than the housing units that would be either in a duplex or in a triplex. Whatever units have the most bedrooms, those would probably be them, the units in the single family dwellings.
Mhm.
Now, I would just tell you that, speaking as somebody who has gone through close to 1,000 dwelling units in Williston, there are very few that are being built today with 4 bedrooms. It's not to say that there aren't any, but there are very, very few. And by and large, they're 2 and 3 bedroom units. Oftentimes, if there is 3 bedrooms, the third is they finished out the basement to put in an extra bedroom, excuse me. That is actually the norm of what you would see. So
You're talking about like currently what's being built. I think our population and the way we live now is really different. It isn't like 25% of the population single 1-person households, right?
Something like that. I forget the exact number.
And maybe 35% are 2 people households. So again, to me, housing choices and looking to be what the language was, typical employees, in the whole range. I'm not hearing that here.
May I ask what you're looking to hear? That would make you feel like that is being addressed?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of new to this, and certainly in the growth area, I think as a town, we're very exclusive, right? I mean, our town employees can't live here, our Walmart employees can't live here. We become a very exclusive town with a lot of really high-end housing, targeted at, say, the top 10 or 20% of Vermonters in the whole area. So when I think about new housing, I mean, if you build single-family homes, are you encouraging out-of-staters to come get them, or are you housing the people that live here right now? So to me, when I think about the housing crisis in Vermont, to me, it's like 1 or 2 bedroom units. What can our Walmart employees live in? What can our town employees, our teachers live in? So I respect that a lot of that building will be done in the growth center, but I still think that a property like this could address that if you want to argue that you're looking at a public good.
No, and I would say Williston's done a lot to promote that, not necessarily on this parcel to say, but the way the growth management system's set up, the vast overwhelming amount of allocations dedicated to the growth center, where you typically see stuff like that. 1 bedroom units in Williston are only counted as half a unit.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know, so they've done a lot to, I feel, promote, maybe not in the RZD district, but in other zoning districts within the town.
Right, but again, you're coming in under the
Sure.
guise of a public good, and I think our biggest crisis right now is housing.
Thinking about other subdivisions that have gone through growth management, I can't recall all of their scores off my head, but the one that comes to the forefront is Summerfield. And that one is proposing an incredible range of units, including some 1 bedroom buildings. So I'm not saying that this has to look exactly like Summerfield, but when I think about the way a project goes through the pre-app and that growth management process, I think there's probably a little more wiggle room here for more diversity. Without having to like.
Potentially smaller units, but more of them, is that kind of the way that?
I think that fits our
that makes
projected
sense to me,
population,
yeah.
right?
Especially if they count as half a unit, I didn't realize that. I'm not-
Just 1 bedroom.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you could have a dozen 1 bedroom units, I don't know, but
Yeah.
I agree that making them, they've gotta be smaller to be more affordable,
Right.
and,
Mhm.
you know, that seems desirable.
And there's some design elements too, like, so maybe they don't have finished basements, a lot of smaller finished floor areas, cheaper. Building a garage in and of itself is like $40,000 or $50,000, like maybe some units don't have garages, and then we're not even talking about garage forward. So I think there's probably some simpler design ways to add more housing variety and achieve a higher score.
And sometimes too, right, in bigger units, they build ADUs right in them, right away, like it's a 3 bedroom with a 1 bedroom attached in the same single family home. Those kinds of ideas, I think, would give us more flexibility around housing.
We haven't seen much of that around here yet, but I mean, the ADU discussion is ongoing.
Mhm.
There are a few units that I can think of that come to mind where in a brand new dwelling, the party that was buying it specifically put in an ADU as part of the original construction.
Makes sense.
There was one that I can think of in Finney. There's another one that comes to mind, but that's the exception. And unless there's been a really big boom in the number of ADUs in the last 4.5 years, you know, the town has a fairly liberal standard for ADUs. However, the level of which they're actually built is, you know, there's only a few each year that come along.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, ADUs probably make more sense in older communities, but yeah, I would like to pass this around, because this is from the outside, looks like a regular house, but it's got an ADU built right in front. So I'll pass that around as something I think that could.
It seems like that their time has come.
Right, and I mean, the other thing too, I mean, you hear a lot of people talking about traffic, but if you could build it, and I'm not, this isn't a fully baked idea, but if you could have a community that people could downsize to when their kids get older, then they could free up the 3 and 4 bedroom houses and not have to move to North Carolina. They could stay in the area, and people, you know, over 50 may not be in rush hour, you know, everybody's worried, you know, they look at this and say 50 units, there's gonna be 100 cars at 9 o'clock on Old Stage Road. Completely wrong math, I get it. But if you say, hey, it's an older community, people aren't gonna be out there. So there's different ways to look at traffic and housing, I think now.
So I would, this topic came up a bunch of years ago when the select board commissioned a housing task force, and Scott, you were there. And I remember we had a discussion about ADUs, and I had this thought, and I didn't say it at the time, but I'm gonna say it this time, and so, I'll take a little quiz here. Show of hands, how many people in this room live in a single family dwelling? Okay, almost everybody. How many here with their property, their single family dwelling, have an ADU? Now, that was actually more than I expected, but I think ADUs are a great thing. My experience with them has been, though, is there are a lot of people that are very averse to the idea of being a landlord. And they don't want to be a landlord in general, and they certainly don't want to have a tenant. You know, if you have a family member, that makes it a lot easier choice to do. But in lieu of that, a lot of people don't, they don't really want to be a landlord. I know when we bought our house, I had to convince my wife that this ADU that was there was a good idea.
And part of affordability is scale, right? It's density. ADUs are just another shortcut to
Right,
density,
exactly,
right? So
yeah.
you guys have increased the density on this by adding more triplex. and other things.
Yeah, it's, you know, the vast majority are multifamily units.
Mhm.
You know, we do have some singles, which the only development on here that you could consider an ADU, would be the single family lots. You know, a condominium development that you typically see with PUDs nowadays doesn't leave open the ability for ADUs, generally speaking.
Yeah, our bylaw right now only permits ADUs as accessory to a single family home on its own lot. It's a little bit different in the form-based code area, allowing basement apartments and row homes.
And we're proposing pretty small, single family lots. You know, they're pretty much 40-foot wide at the setback lines. But, you know, they do allow for it.
Yeah, I mean, I get that new communities aren't gonna have as many ADUs, so I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily fighting for ADUs, but I am interested in a range of housing options, so we can help it house the people that are currently here.
Yeah.
Not attract out-of-state buyers, you know, and, if 60% of our population needs 1 or 2 bedrooms homes, I mean, who's even gonna buy these, right? You know, as a builder, wouldn't you be interested in the demographic mix of the community and build homes for them?
Absolutely, we wouldn't build them if we didn't feel we could sell them.
Right, but I mean, it's a bigger point, but I would
Yeah.
argue that you're attracting out-of-staters or other folks that would move in from elsewhere to the community. If we already have that sector of the housing stock overbuilt, then you're not helping us with the housing crisis that we have here with our current people.
So we're coming up on the
Yeah,
limit
fair
on what's scheduled for comments and such. I don't know if others can go over the 6:30 adjournment time, but I just want to leave room for other topics.
Fair enough.
Right? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think one of the things that my wife and I are certainly concerned about is affordability. And I know that there are a couple of other constraints like that are gonna add costs to the project in general. More energy efficiency, the higher, very much higher standard of energy efficiency, more sidewalks. So, I mean, there is a balance between building things that are more affordable and the additional overhead that comes with building more infrastructure to certain standards. So I think that's got to be part of the discussion that we have. I think it can't be all, let's make it affordable and let's build up to really, really high standards. We're never going to get there. So, Brian, could you say anything to that?
Yeah, I think the cost of construction is no secret. It's a different world after the pandemic. I mean, you're just seeing what public road comes in for per foot, and it's just crazy numbers that we never would have thought they'd be at. Now, we've taken, I think, big steps to increase affordability, whether it's 10% actually being affordable. The units were spaced about 35 feet. Now they're 20. We have 90 or over 90 of our 110 units are multifamily. We're getting closer to the full build out potential of this development that's allowed. It's in the sewer core. Something is going to get built here that should be close to the max density. We need the housing. And we were at 93, now we're up to 110. We have a vast majority of our units are multifamily. While giving choices of housing types, So I think we are checking a lot of boxes, but we can look into further options that you folks might be interested in.
Well, it might be to have more clarity around number of bedrooms,
Sure,
in our future conversations.
yeah, for sure.
And if they're all 4-bedroom units, then I had to have a different reaction than.
I can say
Yeah.
they will not all be 4-bedroom units, for sure.
How many 4-bedrooms?
I would expect the majority to be 2 to 3. I don't think you're gonna get a 4-bedroom on.
I wouldn't think so.
So, Jack, can I comment a little bit on you're assuming that if you build a more expensive house, that if you build it more efficient, it will be less expensive in the long run to live there. So I think there's balance and trade-offs there too. Going more insulation in, better mechanicals and such. It's gonna be cheaper to live in that house.
We gotta sell it for more,
Yeah, you do, but I think
not to take their side.
right, but I mean, if it's marketed right and everything, you should be able to.
So it eats into affordability by making it more efficient on the front side, right? It limits how many people can.
We look at it.
can
Right,
afford
but
it.
I think there's, maybe we need to rethink that a little bit and somehow, like build in this long-term efficiency into the initial cost.
I mean, that's the tension with, with every building, how do you get something built and still make it?
When
so-
does the excess cost make the payback so far
Yeah,
out
what's
that
no question.
where, and then are you selling to somebody who is okay with thresholds that are a foot deep? Does that take a specific buyer that, you might sell it to the original landowner because he wants a super efficient house, but then he's got to look at a much smaller market to who then he's selling it to, you just kind of,
So I would just use as an example, Summerfield, the proposed development for the Catamount Country Club. Both probably know, Brian and I are both working with the Senasax on that project. That project has a big affordability component to it. In order to get to that, it requires almost full utilization of the density bonus. So you're talking about 5 dwelling units per acre, not 3 dwelling units per acre. So, and even that, I can just tell you that the Senasax are, fretting over every detail and all the things that cost money, because the reality is when you build a project, a housing development with a big affordability component, all the infrastructure to get there is still the same. And so what ends up happening is that the market rate units essentially have to be able to generate enough income to allow you to sell the other units at a reduced price. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying it's very challenging in terms of the spreadsheet and all of the costs that enter into it to get to that big affordability component. And the Senasax have been through several stages of review, but nobody's done anything yet. So it's a challenge. And then if we were coming in and talking about 5 units per acre, this would look very different. And so for some people, that might be just fine, but for many people, it wouldn't be. And, I think for the folks that are on the planning commission.
As in too dense?
Yes, and it would be too much traffic and it would be too much fill in the blank. And there were a lot of those concerns that were raised at the planning commission level. There were all kinds of voices that, had various concerns. So we're trying to thread the needle and see if we can address as many of those as we can.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Ken?
Absolutely.
So you could get 5 dwelling units per, is it acre?
5 per acre.
5 per acre. So, and you've mentioned that there's probably negative consequences of that. Is a negative consequence to the people around it? Or negative consequence to the people who would be residing? I feel that there's a positive consequence to the people who would actually be living in those houses because there's more options for them. There's more people that could live in the neighborhood. But then I get it that the consequence to the area might be perceived to be unfavorable.
Well, so what I would say is, as being on the applicant side here, is that we're listening to all the voices, right? We're listening to all the voices because at the end of the day, we want to try to work with the community to see if we can get an approval. And not everybody is speaking with the same voice. Not everybody's concerns are the same. You know, our opening proposition for this specific plan was tied to criteria. I've said it before, tied to criteria, which is in the town plan and in the bylaw relative to that vision corridor and the open space. And that was where we started from. It's like, well, here's this criteria in the town plan. Here's this criteria that's in the bylaw. And the town plan specifically mentions this view shed corridor. So that was kind of where we started from. And so we're really trying to get at what would be an open space development, would preserve the view shed. And then along with that, we came to understand how important the windswept farm was. And there's the, you know, the open space that would potentially be available to that as a way of preserving the windswept farm. Would a more dense project have a negative impact on the horse farm? You know, I don't know. Mike could certainly, you know, mention that. But my point is, we weren't necessarily thinking of this as, let's see if we can get a specific plan approved by coming in with a really dense affordable housing project. It was the original idea was around something that would be an open space development. Again, a criteria that identified in the town plan and in the bylaw that we were trying to get to. Now, as the charges come from the planning commission, there's a lot of other things that have been identified for us to try to address. And, you know, we are certainly going to try to address as many as possible. But I can still hear all those other voices that showed up for all those meetings, stating their concerns about the number of people, the number of dwelling units, the number of cars, the effects on traffic. I mean, all of those issues were raised.
We're coming up on time here. I think we've talked a lot about this subject. I mean, this was going to be a big subject. What is the plan for sort of the next meeting? Like, do we want to continue to talk about growth management score, or do you guys want to move on to another section of the charge?
And Alex, just a placeholder thought for probably the next meeting, is that part of the planning commission charge is to look at housing approach to cater to people with developmental disabilities. It's clearly spelled out there. I was curious to hear the perspective of that charge, because I do think that that's an important point to be brought up.
Yeah, it's one of the ways to score on the growth management score. I don't want everybody to get too confused by the memo to think that we need every lettered item under growth management score addressed. The point was to say, here's the growth management score matters to us. It was too low as designed for the planning commission to consider it against the benefit. And here are a list of different ways to potentially address that. They don't necessarily have to address all of them, just to be clear.
Is accessibility required, a required element by the town for new builders?
Not through local zoning. I'm not sure when state or federal requirements would.
No, ADA kicks in when you get to fourplex or accessible unit. Typically.
Just imagine those curbsides sometimes in newer neighborhoods, wheelchair users won't be able to access them. So as simple as that could be an accessibility issue.
Yeah, but it is town standard for the warning plates you see, you know, around town. That's a part of the public works standard that we obviously adhere to.
Okay, you guys want to make a note, just any other notes you want to bring on that for Ruben for the next meeting?
Okay.
And then do you guys have sort of a tackle plan here for what's next steps?
Can I ask one question? The design that you had on the, up on the board and the one I have on my computer, that is your current,
So then we have,
that's on,
yeah.
that
this-
is your current
That's correct.
design.
That's correct.
Okay,
It's the
all right,
latest-
so
the latest
it
and
is
greatest.
superseded any other design that we have seen?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Again, this was intended to try to address, the other ones were all pre-charge from the planning commission. So this one was taking the charge, taking all of the other things that we were trying to address, like the view shed, which I just mentioned, et cetera, and then trying to address as many of those things. I think the big picture was the language used the last meeting. What's our grand vision? What would it look like? And
Right. Yeah, and going through the growth management, obviously, there's no governing body to give us a score like the DRB would. So that's why, and every item is specifically talked about in the chart. So that's why we're going through and, we could either pick up here next time, or we could move on to another category. We could start getting comments from, I think the school district was one of them, Public Works, Fire. Obviously, they're gonna have things for us to talk about at our next meeting. We could do both probably by the next meeting. Staff has reviewed the growth management piece of it very briefly, but still was comfortable that we were gonna at least meet the 50 points that was in the charge, but it sounds like we're getting more detailed discussion, as we go through each piece of growth management, so.
Yeah, so with the growth.
Got about
management
halfway.
piece, what I could do as staff, when we propose the staff reports to the development review board, each person in the office individually scores a project, what they think. And then we all come together and, agree on a recommended score. We can do that for Glaser, and I think that could give you a pretty close bet. The DRB usually agrees with staff and maybe, what goes a little bit above or below. So that can be a good baseline of what the score is. I can also, I'm thinking about some elements of the charge in the bylaw where this is either, checking the box or might need a little tweaking, or where I foresee, some public works or fire comments. So I can help put that together for the next agenda.
It is growth management season.
It is growth management season.
Is it
all I'm thinking
possible to
about.
compare, the gross management scores are kind of tabulated by category. Just for those of us that aren't as familiar, could those be compared to a few comparable projects that have been scored? So you can say, okay, this is scoring like this compared to something that is similar in recent history.
Yeah, and there's not too many that are as similar, so I'll probably just include a couple recent comps, even some of the smaller projects, just to give you a picture of what RZD scores have looked like over the past couple of years.
it's the one on North Williston Road, was that Creek's Edge?
Yeah, Creek's Edge, I think that like barely squeaked by at like 30 or 35.
You have to reach a minimum 30, and the max ever in town is 71.
I agree. I think that's great to have that information. So we know, are we seeing substantially more than is expected in normal growth management?
And I forget, there was some discussion about the town saying, do they or do they not even want land in the green? I mean, the light green, who, like, I don't know where that netted out.
Because they're getting used.
Well, they're just, it's kind of a question. I think at some point it was discussed, I can't remember who said it, but does the town, is it in their interest to take that?
Right, open space costs and maintenance. Even if the open space is donated to the town, there will be perpetual costs associated with land maintenance and management. The applicant shall research the anticipated annual cost. Applicant, staff, and committee shall seek input from the select board and staff on the meeting at applicant's expense as it relates to the maintenance and management of the open space.
So
So,
it's still one of the things that we need to work through.
yeah, so like ballpark, what does that documentation annual cost look like? And then kind of getting like a head nod from the select board for that.
And even what the maintenance is gonna be might be, I don't know if we need to discuss that, but is it gonna be mowed twice a year or not? I mean, obviously you don't wanna, at least from our committee standpoint, you do nothing in the wetlands. In fact, we wanna see good delineation of where those buffers are, so people know you don't mow in there, you don't do anything.
And those wetlands are currently used as agricultural for haying, so I think
Right.
there's some, flexibility there. If it gets given to the town, it could continue to operate as
Yeah, there's gotta
agricultural.
be some some accounting for that so that they can continue to be used for ag.
Mhm.
But the ones around, you know, these darker green ones could all be set up in such a way that people know you don't do any maintenance in there, you don't mow them.
Yeah, usually the town and the wetlands program require like boulders. or-
Yeah, that's what we
or something.
usually
That's
suggest.
a lot of boulders.
Yeah, fences, boulders, I mean, it is tricky. But as any of you that have worked in the town, it's not uncommon to have people inching, mowing
Oh,
into
absolutely.
those. We've had all kinds of problems with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that'll probably be, if there's like head nods on this overall design, start soliciting comment from the other departments in the district as necessary on this one. And then thinking about the wetlands and that open space and windswept farm, that's kind of a separate topic. If this is the layout to go with.
So to turn the question around, what would the committee like to see next? I mean, I think there's lots of different things, but from my end of it, I would want to be addressing the things that the committee wants to see next.
When do we meet again?
Well, depending on
Depends on
what it is we have to do between now and then, that would determine when that next meeting would be.
I would throw out a proposal for that, which is from the staff. I would love to see that score report and comments from fellow committee members. I'd like to see any specific questions you have about this plan that's been presented tonight relative to any parts of the charge. But specifically from the applicant, I would like to see you guys move on from growth management score to presenting the next sections of the charge.
We kind of only got like halfway through the growth management.
We did
stuff.
only get halfway
So do you want,
Yeah.
Emily, do you think it would be a good idea for us to fill out a growth management application?
I think we'd have to.
For this?
Yeah. Yeah, let's do
I
that.
got another one I'm
So,
gonna be
hold on,
doing, I'll be
hold on one
sharp.
second, Leah. Let me ask a question.
Yeah, it's not.
Is the committee happy with what they see on the board?
Partially, we don't know what these units are gonna be like yet, though. 'cause
Well,
I think your
how about the layout? So here we've gone an hour and a half and we've been
Yeah.
talking about this.
Yeah,
Nobody's
that-
had, nobody's
That's a
asked that
reasonable
question.
request, and we like the
You
layout.
know, the layout. I mean, is that a topic for next time? Is it a topic for, the applicant came in with a different layout for what was seen previously, and this is, and they've explained the reasoning why, on how they got here. What does the committee think? You don't have to accept it.
I would have questions around Mountain View Road, because this was new to me, but you guys were saying that having traffic coming out there, that everybody would like it traffic wise, safety wise, if it was old stage. So whoever's the expert on traffic. And
Yeah, I mean, I
what that
certainly
means.
have questions about it, and I didn't know if like, we're getting ready to sharpen the pencil on this one, or if like, we're gonna move on to a new one next time, and I could, so.
That's why I say I
Yeah.
want the folks from the committee to come back with your questions on this. Like, I have concerns about this. I have concerns that this feels
So
like.
should we be
it's-
telling that to the applicant now as opposed to waiting 3 weeks? Because they're trying to answer our questions, and if we throw a grenade in the middle of the table 3 weeks from now, they've just wasted a whole bunch of time.
They tell us as early as possible, please.
Everything does build on the road layout.
Yep.
So I should keep my mouth shut. I talk too much.
No, please.
I will tell you that from some of the other layouts I liked a little better. To me, this is 3 neighborhoods, not a community. So you've got 3 points of access. 3 different groups of homes, 3 different groups of people. I'm a big fan of connectivity. If you could figure out a way, somebody mentioned, I forget who it was just earlier today, that if you came in on the north side of Old Stage and ate into the green space a little bit and then looped around and tied it together, and then maybe pulled the green space to the south up top, so you don't lose any actual acreage, but you're just pushing and pulling it a little bit. That little pod, that 9-unit pod down the bottom is kind of lost. I mean, it looks like Al Senecal's development over at the top of the golf course,
Yeah.
which just kind of hangs out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
nothing against Al. So, and I would love to see the other one tied into, and I mean, that's, I know why you did it. But we're building a community, it would love to, and it would be great to see if you could tie it together. There's my grenade.
But doesn't that bring back the 40 problem, the 40? homes?
No, because you'd be looping it, you'd be tying it all together.
Oh,
You'd
so you
have-
want the access on Mountain View?
I'm not really even addressing the 40. We kind of talked that through, and if the town is fine with that, then I can certainly be fine with that too.
So I think my recommendation, we're kind of answering the question of do we like it? And we got halfway through the growth management criteria. We didn't get all the way through the other half. So maybe I can work on some growth management spec score stuff. Maybe we meet in 2 weeks. We continue this discussion of what do we
What
like,
do
what
people
do we
think?
need to tweak, what
I
do
don't think
people
we
think?
can meet in 2 weeks. I don't know about other people, but that's February break for kids' schools.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out of town,
March
including me.
2nd.
So I would say 3 weeks is probably a good cadence again.
March 9th.
Yeah, I'll have to
I'm out of town.
tweak on that one. I don't know, because that's in the energy committee or the Catamount Community Forest meets. So we might need to figure out a Zoom thing, which might be doable. Because we have 2 Zoom meetings at once. But maybe we might be able to make that work. We would just have to meet in the police station probably.
It's fine.
And the homework would be for them to fill out an application that gets scored in between.
Yeah, they fill out a questionnaire. We as staff would come up with what a speculative score would be.
Because I do agree, we should spend some time just saying, do we like it or not, but I'd also like for the committee to come up with like, how are we going to move forward? Because I feel like we could just end up spinning wheels for an hour and a half every time we meet, instead of having like, this is how we want to move the ball forward, to say we're making progress. And because, I mean, if we meet again in 3 weeks, the charge date that we have is gonna get here very quickly. It's just kind of how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I understand completely. That's why I was saying, moving on to some of the other areas, if we've gotten through, I would just ask the applicant to, finish through the growth management presentation and try to move into another area. Once this committee gets through discussing all of the items on the charge, we can come up with an issues list. So here are the things that we believe are still open that need to be discussed. But I'd like to get through sort of allowing the applicant to present their response to all the items in the charge and us to ask questions.
I would appreciate as a committee member, like what you're reading as far as your growth management score, if that can be something that we can have as reading material, just so we're prepared, or at least I'm prepared when you're talking
So
about.
what we would do, as I would envision it, is between Brian and I would fill out, there's an application form for growth management. We would fill it out. Most of the stuff we've already talked about so far, but we would fill it out. And then the staff has a table, a template that they use, and they would generate a score.
Okay,
So if we were gonna do this in 3 weeks, I'm looking at my calendar here as I'm speaking. We can try to get something in. I can try and see if we can get something in by the end of next week, but my guess is it would probably maybe go into the beginning of March. Emily,
Yeah,
since,
I would probably want it by like the 27th. So we can do staff scores that week and then maybe try to get the committee's agenda out the preceding Friday, so they have more time.
Friday the 3rd.
Yeah, Friday
Okay.
the 3rd.
All right, so we'll see if we can get something into you by Monday, the 27th, then. That will be our
Yeah,
filing deadline, as it were.
yeah, and then try to get the agenda out on the 3rd, so that gives the committee time to read through it and come up with their.
Okay, and so the agenda then the committee wants us to do is to submit a growth management application and to continue the hypothetical review of growth management relative to the plan as it's, do you want to see revisions? Are you expecting revisions in the plan document? Because we need to know those, that ASAP, that's time.
Well, let's talk about that now, because that's effectively what Scott's saying, right? So let's have enough, anybody have substantive comments on the design of this plan that would require major revisions? Let's start talking about them now. We have our next steps, we have our meeting date. So
I do think that without,
We have,
without any other
we
pieces
set a
of
meeting date?
information,
I
March
think we just
9th.
said the 9th.
we can't.
Are you out of town?
No, I'm here. I know, I'm here.
You're here, good.
Again, the biggest thing is the roads at this point, like if the unit mix changes or, you know,
Yeah.
swap out some singles for twos, that's not. a big deal.
I'm more concerned, I'm kind of connected.
Yeah, no, I hear
I share Scott's, or my comment was gonna be exactly that. This feels like 3 neighborhoods. And the one thing that really sticks out to me is that there's gonna be a high temptation to make all of the affordable housing happen in that one neighborhood right
Okay.
against the road.
Understood,
And so I don't wanna see someone try to create a ghetto.
understood.
Other comments,
I mean, I had similar comments with, as, Scott raised, and, you know, the connection to Mountain View and, you know, turning left. It just, I have some question about that, and traffic